Rich students laughed when the janitor's son entered the courtroom. But when security footage revealed what really happened, their smiles disappeared. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in Boston Public High's main hallway as Michael Thompson walked between classes, his worn backpack heavy with textbooks. He'd gotten used to keeping his head down, focused on getting through each day without drawing attention. But the sound of someone being slammed against a locker made him stop dead in his tracks. "Where's your lunch money coming from today, scholarship boy?" Brandon Moore's voice carried through the corridor, dripping with contempt. "Daddy's welfare check coming yet?" Michael's fingers tightened around his backpack strap. 20 feet ahead, Brandon had Tommy Peterson pinned against the lockers. Tommy's lunch tray lay scattered on the floor, his sandwich crushed under Brandon's expensive sneakers. "Please," Tommy whispered, his voice shaking. "Just leave me alone." Brandon's friends laughed, forming a tight circle around them. Each one wore designer clothes that probably cost more than Michael's mom made in a week at the hospital. He recognized the smirks on their faces, the same ones they'd worn 2 years ago when they'd cornered him in this very hallway. "What's wrong?" "Can't afford to answer me." Brandon pushed Tommy harder against the lockers. "Maybe if your dad wasn't just a janitor." The words hit Michael like a punch to the gut. His mind flashed back to 6th grade, the day after his dad left. Brandon had found out somehow, had taunted him for weeks about being abandoned. "Guess your dad couldn't stand having such a loser for a son," he'd said. No one had stepped in to help. Michael's hands started shaking. He thought about his mom working double shifts at the hospital just to keep them afloat. About his little sister Sarah's asthma medication eating up what little savings they had. About all the times he'd stayed silent, telling himself it wasn't his problem. "I said, where's your money?" Brandon grabbed Tommy's collar. "Hey!" The word burst from Michael's mouth before he could stop it. The hallway went quiet as heads turned toward him. Brandon's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" Michael's heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced himself to walk forward. "Leave him alone." Brandon's friends exchanged glances, clearly surprised that anyone would challenge them. Brandon himself looked more amused than angry. "Look who finally found his voice," Brandon sneered. "The other charity case wants to play hero." "Just back off," Michael said, his voice steadier than he felt. He positioned himself between Brandon and Tommy. "He didn't do anything to you. You defending this loser?" Brandon stepped closer, using his height advantage to loom over Michael. "What's wrong? Poor kids gotta stick together." Michael could smell Brandon's expensive cologne, could see the gold watch on his wrist, probably a gift from his CEO father. The same father who donated the new gymnasium last year, whose name was on a plaque by the school entrance. "The only loser I see is you," Michael said, meeting Brandon's gaze. "Picking on people to make yourself feel big. It's pathetic." Brandon's face darkened. "What did you just say to me?" "You heard me." The punch came fast, but Michael saw it coming. He ducked, and Brandon's fist hit the locker behind him with a metallic clang. Brandon howled in pain and rage. What happened next was a blur. Brandon lunged, and Michael sidestepped, causing Brandon to stumble. They grappled, knocking into the trophy case that lined the hallway. Glass shattered. Someone screamed. Michael felt a sharp sting as broken glass cut his arm. "What is going on here?" Principal Edwards' voice cut through the chaos. Everyone froze. The hallway had filled with students, phones out, recording everything. Brandon was bleeding from a small cut on his cheek. The trophy case lay in ruins, decades of school history scattered across the floor in broken pieces. "He attacked me." Brandon pointed at Michael, his voice rising with fake innocence. "I was just talking to Tommy, and he went crazy." Michael opened his mouth to defend himself, but the words stuck in his throat as he saw the phones pointed at him, the shocked faces of his classmates. He could already imagine how this would play out. Brandon's father would make sure of it. "Mr. Thompson?" Principal Edwards' voice was cold. "My office. Now." As Michael followed the principal, he caught a glimpse of Tommy slipping away into the crowd, head down, saying nothing. Brandon's friends were already gathering around him, patting his back, helping him up. Through the window at the end of the hall, Michael could see the janitor watching, mop frozen mid-stroke. In the principal's office, the phone call to his mother was brief and brutal. "Mrs. Thompson?" This is Principal Edwards. There's been an incident involving Michael. Yes, I understand you're at work. No, this can't wait. Your son has been involved in a violent altercation that resulted in significant damage to school property. We're going to need you to come in immediately. Michael sat in the hard plastic chair, blood drying on his arm, watching his future crumble. His mom would have to leave her shift early again. They couldn't afford that, not with Sarah's medical bills. But as he thought about Tommy's face, about all the other kids Brandon had terrorized, he couldn't bring himself to regret standing up. The sound of rapid footsteps in the hallway made him look up. Through the office window, he could see Brandon's father striding toward the principal's office, his expensive suit immaculate, his face thunderous. Behind him, Brandon smirked, all signs of distress vanishing from his face. Michael took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain. He was done being silent. The door opened, and the real battle began. The principal's office felt smaller with 5 people crammed inside. Michael's mom sat next to him, still in her nurse's scrubs, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The dark circles under her eyes seemed deeper than usual. Across from them, Brandon and his father, Richard Moore, occupied the other chairs. Brandon had cleaned up, the small cut on his cheek now covered with a far larger than necessary bandage. His father's presence filled the room. Expensive cologne, designer suit, and an air of absolute authority. Principal Edwards cleared his throat. "Mr. Moore, Mrs. Thompson, thank you for coming in on such short notice." "My time is valuable, Edwards," Richard Moore said, checking his Rolex. "Let's get to the point. This boy attacked my son and destroyed school property." Michael's mom straightened in her chair. "My son says that's not what happened." "Oh." Moore's eyebrow arched. "And we're supposed to take the word of a—" He paused, his eyes sliding over their worn clothes. "A scholarship student?" The implied slur hung in the air. Michael's hands clenched into fists under the desk. "Actually," Principal Edwards interjected, turning his computer monitor around. "We have security footage of the incident." Michael's heart lifted. Finally, proof of what really happened. But as the video played, his hope turned to ash in his mouth. The footage showed only the end of the confrontation. Michael and Brandon grappling, the trophy case shattering. Everything before that, Brandon's bullying, Tommy's harassment, the first punch, was conveniently missing. "As you can see," Moore said, his voice smooth as oil, "this was an unprovoked attack." "That's not true," Michael burst out. "He was bullying Tommy Peterson. Ask him." "Tommy?" Principal Edwards pressed a button on his desk phone. "Please send in Mr. Peterson." The minutes stretched like hours until Tommy shuffled in, eyes fixed on the floor. His father, the school janitor, stood behind him, still in his gray work suit. "Tommy," Principal Edwards said gently, "can you tell us what happened in the hallway today?" Tommy glanced up, meeting Michael's eyes for a split second. Then his gaze shifted to Brandon, to Mr. Moore, to his father's worn face. I didn't see anything," Tommy mumbled. "I was just walking to lunch." Michael felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "Tommy, that's not." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson." Moore cut in. "You and your father can go." As they left, Michael caught Mr. Peterson's apologetic look. The janitor's shoulders were slumped, defeated. Michael understood. A single-parent janitor couldn't afford to make enemies with the school's biggest donor. "Well," Moore said, standing, "I think this is clear-cut. The boy damaged school property and attacked my son. We'll be pressing charges." "Charges?" Michael's mom's voice cracked. "He's 14. Old enough to face consequences," Moore replied. Unless what?" Michael's mom leaned forward. "We might be willing to handle this internally. If your son admits his guilt, apologizes to Brandon, and agrees to certain conditions." Michael's mom reached for her purse, hands shaking. "We can pay for the damages." "I have some savings." "Mom, no." Michael protested. "That's for Sarah's medicine." Moore's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The trophy case alone is worth thousands. Not to mention the emotional trauma to my son. I'll need to consult a lawyer," Michael's mom said firmly. Moore laughed. "At your salary? Good luck finding one willing to take on my legal team." He turned to Principal Edwards. "I trust you'll handle the immediate disciplinary actions?" Principal Edwards nodded, not meeting anyone's eyes. Michael will be suspended pending further investigation. Suspended? Michael's mom stood up. He was defending another student, a student who denies anything happened. Principal Edwards replied wearily. My hands are tied, Mrs. Thompson. Outside the office, Brandon smirked as they passed. See you in court, charity case. Michael's mom drove them home in silence, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. In their small apartment, Sarah was waiting with Mrs. Rodriguez from next door, who watched her during emergencies. Miguel, Mrs. Rodriguez said, using her nickname for him. What happened? Your sister was worried? Sarah ran to hug him, her breathing slightly wheezy. Mom's hospital called. They were mad she left early again. Their mom disappeared into the kitchen. Through the thin walls, Michael heard her on the phone. Yes, I understand this is my second warning. No, it won't happen again. Please, I need this job. Later that night, after Sarah was asleep, Michael found his mom at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, bills, bank statements, Sarah's medical records. Mom, I'm sorry. She looked up, eyes red but dry. We'll figure this out. Maybe I should just apologize, take their deal. No. Her voice was firm. You stood up for what's right. We're not letting them buy our silence. She picked up her phone. I'm calling every law firm in Boston. Someone will help us. But as the night wore on, the rejections piled up. Sorry, we're not taking new cases. Our retainer starts at $5,000. Up against Richard Moore? No, thank you. Around midnight, Michael's phone buzzed with messages from classmates. Dude, you're trending on school social media. Everyone's sharing the video. Brandon saying you went psycho. He clicked one link and immediately wished he hadn't. The edited video was everywhere, each share adding comments that twisted the truth further. Scholarship kid snaps. Probably on drugs. Get him out of our school. In his bedroom, Michael opened his desk drawer and pulled out a worn notebook, his diary. Inside, he documented every incident of bullying he'd witnessed. Dates, names, details. 2 years of watching, staying quiet, writing it all down. He thought maybe someday it would matter. Now, staring at the pages, he wondered if anyone would ever believe him. His phone buzzed again. An unknown number. Back off now, or things get worse. Ask your little sister how her breathing is. Michael's blood ran cold. From Sarah's room came the familiar sound of her inhaler. The message disappeared before he could screenshot it, leaving him alone in the dark with the truth no one wanted to hear. The juvenile courthouse loomed over them, all gray stone and tinted windows. Michael tugged at his borrowed tie, a loan from Mrs. Rodriguez's son, who'd worn it to prom last year. His mom stood beside him in her only dress, the one she saved for church. Remember what Ms. Chun said? His mom whispered as they climbed the steps. Let her do the talking. Ms. Chun, their court-appointed defender, waited by the entrance. Her blazer was wrinkled, dark circles under her eyes, matching the coffee stain on her sleeve. 3 case files were tucked under her arm. Michael's was the smallest. Morning, Michael. She checked her watch. We have 10 minutes before. A black SUV pulled up, and Richard Moore stepped out, followed by 3 men in pristine suits. Brandon emerged last, wearing a perfectly tailored blazer that made Michael's borrowed clothes feel even shabbier. That's Donald Pierce leading their team, Miss Chin muttered. He charges more per hour than I make in a week. Inside the courtroom, the contrast was even starker. The Moore's legal team spread out at their table, laptops and documents arranged with military precision. At their table, Miss Chin pulled out a notepad with a bent corner and a pen that barely worked. All rise, the bailiff called. The Honorable Judge Thompson presiding. Judge Thompson, a tall black man with gray at his temples, surveyed the room. His gaze lingered on Michael for a moment before moving to the prosecution. Your Honor, Pierce began, standing smoothly. This is a straightforward case of violent assault and vandalism. We have video evidence, which conveniently starts mid-incident. Miss Chin interrupted, scrambling to her feet. Your Honor, we contest the authenticity. The footage is from the school's own security system, Pierce countered. Are you suggesting tampering? We're suggesting incomplete evidence. We have witnesses who've already given statements supporting our version of events. Michael's stomach churned as he watched Tommy Peterson's father take the stand. The janitor wouldn't meet his eyes. "Mr. Peterson," Pierce said, "please tell the court what you saw that day." Mr. Peterson's hands twisted in his lap. I was cleaning the hallway. I saw the boys arguing. Then Michael pushed Brandon into the trophy case. And before that, I wasn't. He swallowed hard. That's all I saw. During the break, Michael overheard two clerks whispering, "Moore's kid again? Third fight this year. Dad always makes it go away. Must be nice having money like that." Back in session, Brandon took the stand, eyes wide with practiced innocence. "I was just talking to Tommy about homework." Michael came out of nowhere, started yelling about his dad leaving. "Objection." Ms. Chin stood. "Relevance?" Establishing the defendant's state of mind, Pierce smiled, showing a pattern of emotional instability. Judge Thompson leaned forward. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully." Brandon continued, his performance perfect. "He seemed crazy, started shoving me. I tried to walk away, but he grabbed me. I was scared." Michael bit his tongue until he tasted blood. Through the gallery windows, he could see his mom in the hallway, arguing with her hospital supervisor on the phone. "They're threatening to fire her," he whispered to Ms. Chun. "Focus on the case," she replied, but her eyes were sympathetic. "We'll figure that out later." The next blow came from Principal Edwards, who presented Michael's disciplinary record. Every late arrival, every missed homework, every time he dozed in class after staying up with Sarah during her asthma attacks. During another recess, Michael escaped to the bathroom, splashing water on his face. The door opened behind him. "Rough day?" It was the bailiff, an older black man with kind eyes. "Sometimes the truth takes time to come out." "They're lying," Michael said. "All of them? Maybe. But you know what I've learned working here? Lies have short legs. Truth's got stamina." Back in the courtroom, Ms. Chun called Michael's teachers. Most gave lukewarm character references, clearly worried about their jobs. But his English teacher, Mrs. Kumar, stood firm. "Michael is one of my best students," she declared. "He helps other kids with their essays, stays after class to discuss books." "The boy they're describing? That's not him." Pierce's cross-examination was brutal. "And you supervise every lunch period? Every hallway interaction? You can guarantee he's never shown violent tendencies?" "No, but..." No further questions. The final witness was Sarah's doctor, testifying about Michael's home situation. "He's been like a third parent," Dr. Martinez said. "During his sister's worst attacks, he's the one who keeps her calm, counts her breaths." "Very touching," Pierce interrupted. "But irrelevant to the charges?" By day's end, Michael's head throbbed. Judge Thompson's voice cut through his haze. "Given the severity of the charges and the evidence presented, I'm setting a follow-up hearing for next week. Mr. Moore, your request for a restraining order is granted. Mr. Thompson is to have no contact with Brandon or any other witnesses." Outside, Brandon's smirk said everything. His father was already on his phone. "Yes, the order's in place." "No, the janitor won't be a problem. His contract renewal's coming up." That night, Michael's social isolation became complete. His phone buzzed with notifications. "Group chat, basketball team, removed you. School club server. Your access has been revoked. At Michael T has been blocked." In the kitchen, his mom was crying over bills. From Sarah's room came the sound of wheezing. Michael opened his diary again, adding today's events to the growing record. As he wrote, a plan began forming. The truth had stamina, the bailiff had said. Maybe it just needed help coming out. His phone lit up with one last message from Tommy. "I'm sorry. Dad said we'd lose everything if I didn't." Michael started to reply, then stopped. Sorry wouldn't help him now. But maybe, just maybe, the whole truth would. He pulled out a fresh page and began writing everything down, every detail they'd left out of court. Tomorrow, he'd find a way to make someone listen. The sound of his mom's muffled sobs mixed with Sarah's breathing machine, a rhythm that followed him into uneasy dreams of justice delayed, but not denied. Michael arrived early at school the next morning, before most students and teachers. The halls were empty except for the cleaning staff, including Mr. Peterson, who was mopping near the repaired trophy case. Their eyes met. Mr. Peterson quickly looked away, but not before Michael caught the shame in his expression. "Mr. Peterson," Michael said quietly, "can we talk?" The janitor glanced around nervously. You know we're not supposed to. Please. 5 minutes. Mr. Peterson led him to the janitor's office. Really just a glorified supply closet. The small desk was covered with cleaning schedules and maintenance reports. A framed photo showed a younger Mr. Peterson with Tommy at a baseball game. I saw your original incident report, Michael said, before they made you change it. The mop handle clattered against the desk. How did you? The day it happened, I came back after everyone left. Saw you filling it out through the window. Michael took a deep breath. You wrote down everything you saw. The whole truth. Mr. Peterson sank into his chair. They'll fire me. They're going to anyway. Michael watched the realization hit. I heard Mr. Moore on the phone. Your contract renewal? The janitor's face crumpled. Tommy's college fund. Everything we saved. I have proof. Michael pulled out his phone. I recorded Moore's threat outside the courthouse. And this, he opened his diary. Every incident I've witnessed. Dates, times, witnesses, including the day Brandon broke that kid's arm last year and blamed it on a sports accident. Jesus. Mr. Peterson flipped through the pages. You documented everything? My mom taught me. Working in a hospital, she says good records save lives. Michael leaned forward. Help me, Mr. Peterson. Before someone really gets hurt. A knock at the door made them both jump. Ms. Chen stood there, looking more alert than Michael had ever seen her. Good morning, Mr. Peterson. She entered, closing the door. I hoped I'd find you both here. How did you? I've been doing some digging. She pulled out a file. Your son's not the first student Brandon's targeted, is he? But the complaints always disappear. Mr. Peterson's hands shook. They said if I changed my statement, they'd set up a college fund for Tommy. Full ride. Get it in writing? No. Ms. Chen nodded. Of course not. Just like they didn't put in writing the threats to other parents. But they did leave a trail. She spread documents across the desk. Maintenance records, security logs, incident reports. All with subtle inconsistencies, changed dates, missing pages. The school board outsources security footage storage to Moore's company, she said. Convenient, right? Michael stared at the evidence. Why are you showing us this? Because, Ms. Chen smiled tiredly. I finally got some help. The door opened again. A tall black woman in a crisp suit entered. Angela Washington, Department of Education Civil Rights Division. We've been watching Moore for months. Mr. Peterson stood straighter. The government's involved? Pattern of discrimination, evidence tampering, misuse of school funds. Ms. Washington listed off. But we needed someone willing to speak up. It'll cost me my job, Mr. Peterson said. Maybe. Or maybe you help us stop this. And we make sure Tommy's college is taken care of legally this time. Michael's phone buzzed. A message from his mom. Hospital gave me final warning. Missing too many shifts. We need to move fast, he said. Ms. Washington nodded. Judge Thompson's given us warrant for the full security footage. But Moore's people are already trying to block it. The original's gone, Mr. Peterson said. They deleted it the same day. Did they? Ms. Chen smiled. Or did someone make a copy first? Mr. Peterson's eyes widened. The backup server. In the maintenance room. It records everything for 48 hours before overwriting. I might have forgotten to mention it to Mr. Moore's team. Hope flickered in Michael's chest. But before they could continue, voices echoed from the hallway. Brandon and his friends had arrived early too. Through the crack in the door, Michael watched them swagger past. Brandon was saying something about his father's latest donation to the school. 2 new computers for the lab, he bragged. Dad says they'll name it after him next. Michael's hand tightened on his diary. The truth was there, documented in ink and backed up by digital proof. But would it be enough? Ms. Washington checked her watch. The warrant team arrives in an hour. Mr. Peterson, we'll need access to that server. They watch me now, he said. Security cameras? Already taken care of. Ms. Chen pointed to her phone, showing a loop of empty hallways. Amateur trick, but it'll buy us time. Michael thought of his mom's warning, of Sarah's medicine running low, of Tommy's defeated expression in court. What do you need me to do? The next hour was a blur of careful planning. Ms. Washington's team would secure the server. Ms. Chun would file emergency motions. Mr. Peterson would provide access and testimony. But the crucial piece came from Michael's diary. This is what we needed, Ms. Washington said, photographing pages. Contemporary documentation, patterns of behavior. Your detailed notes could break this open. As they worked, Michael heard Brandon's voice again, closer now. Dad says the judge is in his pocket. By next week, that loser will be expelled. Michael met Miss Chen's eyes. She nodded slightly. Every word was being recorded. The bell rang. Students filled the halls, parting around Brandon like subjects before a king. No one looked toward the janitor's office, where the truth was finally taking shape. "Remember," Ms. Washington said as they prepared to leave, "act normal. We can't tip them off." Michael headed to class, his diary safely with Ms. Chen. In his pocket, his phone recorded every interaction, every whispered threat, every moment of isolation. The truth had stamina, the bailiff had said. Now it also had witnesses, evidence, and people willing to fight for it. By lunch, the first signs of change appeared. Two suited men entered Principal Edwards' office. The security company's van parked outside, and Richard Moore's expensive car squealed into the parking lot, his face thunderous. The game was changing, but as Michael watched Moore storm into the school, he knew the real battle was just beginning. His phone buzzed again. His mom, "Hospital board meeting tomorrow. Final decision about my job." Time was running out, but for the first time since this started, they had a fighting chance. The truth wouldn't just need stamina now. It would need speed. The hospital cafeteria smelled of disinfectant and weak coffee. Michael sat across from his mom, both of them picking at dried-out sandwiches during her brief lunch break. Her scrubs were wrinkled from a 12-hour shift, and she'd barely touched her food. "They're offering a deal," she said, her voice low. Mr. Moore called personally. Michael's sandwich turned to ash in his mouth. "What kind of deal?" "Drop all charges. Full scholarship for you and Sarah through college." She pulled out a business card with a handwritten number on the back. "Plus this, to cover our inconvenience." The number had too many zeros to be real. "And what do they want?" "Sign an NDA. Say you lied about everything. Transfer to a different school." She met his eyes. "The hospital board meets tomorrow. If I lose this job..." "Mom, I'm not telling you what to do." She grabbed his hand. "But baby, you need to understand what we're up against." The cafeteria doors burst open. A gurney rushed past, doctors shouting orders. Michael watched his mom's eyes follow it, her body tensing with the instinct to help. "When's Sarah's next doctor's appointment?" he asked. "Tomorrow afternoon." Her inhaler's almost empty, and the new prescription. She trailed off. Michael's phone vibrated. "Ms. Chun, emergency meeting. Moore's office. 1 hour." The elevator ride to Moore's downtown office felt like ascending to a different world. Glass and chrome everywhere. Views of Boston Harbor through floor-to-ceiling windows. The reception desk probably cost more than their apartment's yearly rent. Ms. Chun waited by the conference room, along with Ms. Washington. Both looked grim. "They found the backup server," Ms. Chun said quietly. "Someone got to it first." Inside, Richard Moore sat at the head of a massive table, Brandon beside him. Their legal team filled one side. The other side felt empty with just Michael and his two advocates. "Thank you for coming." Moore's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We have a proposition that could benefit everyone." Ms. Washington opened her mouth, but Moore held up a hand. "Just listen." He slid a document across the table. Full admission of guilt from Michael. In exchange, all charges dropped. Full scholarships for both children. Trust fund for the girls' medical expenses. And this, another paper, another number, even larger than before. "You're bribing a minor," Ms. Washington said flatly. "I'm offering an opportunity to avoid further pain." Moore leaned forward. "Your investigation? Already buried. That server? Damaged beyond recovery. The janitor? Resigned this morning, with a very generous settlement." Michael's chest tightened. "Mr. Peterson quit?" "Smart man." Moore nodded. "Took care of his family. Question is, will you?" Brandon smirked from his father's side. On his phone, he pulled up social media. Students sharing edited videos, mocking comments, cruel memes about Michael's family. "It's already out there," Brandon said. "Your reputation's done. Take the deal." Michael looked at the papers. The scholarship offer alone would change their lives. Sarah's medical care secured. His mom's job saved. All it would cost was the truth. His phone buzzed. A message from Tommy. They paid Dad to leave. Said they'd ruin his reputation if he testified. I'm sorry. Another buzz. His mom. Sarah's breathing worse. Doctor says she needs stronger medication. Insurance won't cover it. The windows showed the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there, his sister was struggling to breathe. His mom was counting pills, stretching medications, working herself to exhaustion. You have until tomorrow, Moore said. When the hospital board meets. Timing's important, isn't it? Michael opened his diary app. The digital copy he'd kept. 2 years of documented abuse. Dates. Times. Witnesses. Some already silenced. Others waiting to be bought. There are other copies, Miss Chin whispered. Other witnesses? Are there? Moore raised an eyebrow. Check your email. Ms. Washington's phone chimed. Her face darkened as she read. Investigation suspended, she said. Orders from above. Money talks. Brandon laughed. Dad always says, quiet, Moore snapped. To Michael, your mother's shift ends at 7. The board meets at 8 tomorrow morning. I'll need your answer by midnight. Outside Moore's office, the sun was setting over the harbor. Michael stood at the window, watching boats drift past. We can fight this, Ms. Chun said, but her voice lacked conviction. How? Michael turned. They're erasing everything. Everyone. His phone lit up with a call from home. Mrs. Rodriguez, watching Sarah. She's having trouble breathing. Your mama's stuck at work. Should I call ambulance? Reality crashed down like a physical weight. Sarah struggling for air. His mom trapped at work. Bills piling up. Futures crumbling. And here was Moore, offering salvation. All it would cost was his soul. The ride home was silent. Sarah was better when he arrived. False alarm, but a warning. She sat on the couch, inhaler clutched tight, watching cartoons with tired eyes. Miguel? She asked as he kissed her forehead. Are we in trouble? No, Mija. Everything's okay. Liar. She smiled weakly. I hear Mom crying at night. His phone buzzed one last time. More. Midnight. Tick-tock. Michael opened his diary again. The truth lived in these pages. But truth didn't pay medical bills. Truth didn't keep roofs over heads or food on tables. Maybe Moore was right. Maybe being smart meant knowing when to stay quiet. He started typing a response, fingers heavy as lead. But before he could finish, another message appeared. From the courthouse bailiff. Judge Thompson wants to see you. Now. Unofficial. Michael stared at the phone. Outside, the sun had fully set. He had 2 hours until Moore's deadline. Time to decide what kind of person he really was. The courthouse was different at night. Empty hallways echoed with Michael's footsteps as the bailiff, Mr. Jackson, led him through security. Most lights were off, except for a warm glow from Judge Thompson's chambers. He's not supposed to do this, Mr. Jackson said quietly. Meeting a defendant alone, after hours. But sometimes doing right means breaking small rules to fix bigger wrongs. The judge's office smelled of old books and coffee. Judge Thompson sat behind his desk, jacket off, reading glasses perched on his nose as he studied a file. Michael recognized his diary pages spread across the desk. Sit down, son. The judge didn't look up. We need to talk. Michael sank into the leather chair. A clock on the wall showed 10:15 p.m. Less than 2 hours until Moore's deadline. Mr. Moore made you an offer today. It wasn't a question. How did you? Been on this bench 20 years. Judge Thompson finally looked up. Seen his type before. Rich men who think money can erase truth. Sometimes it can, Michael said quietly. The server, the witnesses, the investigation. Tell me about your sister. The change of subject caught Michael off guard. Sarah? Asthma, right? Severe? Yeah. She needs new medication. Insurance won't cover it. Mom's job is hanging by a thread. The judge nodded. And Moore knows this. Timing his offer with the hospital board meeting. Pressure points. Michael's phone buzzed. Moore, 90 minutes. Decision? Judge Thompson saw the message. He's good at this. Finding people's breaking points. Making the right choice feel impossible. There is no right choice, Michael burst out. If I tell the truth, my family suffers. If I lie, Brandon keeps hurting people. Either way, I lose. Unless there's a third option. The judge pulled out a DVR drive. Security footage from my courtroom. Every hearing, including conversations before and after. Funny thing about rich men, they get careless when they think they're safe. Michael leaned forward. What's on it? Moore and his son. Planning testimony. Rehearsing lies. Discussing payoffs. Judge Thompson smiled slightly. My cameras don't connect to his company's servers. Hope flickered, then died. But the investigation's closed. Ms. Washington said, Department of Education investigation, yes. But I've sent copies to the district attorney's office. State charges aren't so easily buried. Michael's mind raced. That's why you called me here? To tell me help is coming? No. Judge Thompson's face turned grave. I called you here because you have about 1 hour to make the hardest decision of your young life. And you deserve to make it with all the facts. He stood, walking to a wall of law books. You know why I became a judge? Growing up, I saw too many people forced to choose between truth and survival. Watch them break under that weight. The clock ticked to 10:45. Michael's phone buzzed again. A photo from home. Sarah sleeping, inhaler clutched tight. Moore's offer solves everything, Michael said. Sarah's medicine, Mom's job, college, everything except your soul. Judge Thompson turned back. You think you can live with that lie? Watch Brandon hurt other kids, knowing you helped cover it up? I have to protect my family by teaching Sarah that truth doesn't matter? That bullies win? The judge's voice sharpened. That her brother's integrity has a price tag? Michael flinched. On his phone, Moore's messages grew urgent. 1 hour left. Be smart about this. The DA's case could take months, Michael said. We don't have months. No. You have choices. Judge Thompson sat again. Hard ones. But they're yours to make. The clock hit 11 p.m. Michael stared at the diary pages on the desk. His record of truth, of pain, of silence broken. His phone lit up. Ms. Chun, multiple families coming forward. Former victims, the dam's breaking. Then Tommy. Dad showed me the settlement papers. I can't sleep. This isn't right. And finally, his mom. Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. We'll figure it out. We always do. Judge Thompson watched him read each message. System's rigged, son. Always has been. Question is, do we let that break us, or do we break the system? 11:15 p.m. Michael picked up his diary with shaking hands. If I don't take the deal, if I testify, can you protect my family? No. The judge's honesty hurt and helped. But I can promise you this. The truth you speak in my courtroom will be heard. Every word. And justice might be slow, but it comes. Especially when brave people lead the way. Michael's phone chimed one last time. More. Final offer. Midnight approaches. Don't be stupid. Looking at the message, Michael suddenly saw Brandon's face. Not smirking, but scared. A boy hiding behind his father's money. Power built on silence and fear. When? Michael asked. When can I testify? Tomorrow. After your mother's board meeting. Michael's heart stopped. But that's a choice. Truth has a cost. So does silence. Judge Thompson stood. You've carried other people's secrets for years, son. Written them all down, hoping someone would listen. Now someone is. Question is, are you ready to speak them? The clock showed 11:30 p.m. Michael opened his phone, pulled up Moore's message thread. Judge Thompson's hand touched his shoulder. Whatever you decide, remember this moment. When you chose who you're going to be, Michael began to type. Each word a weight lifted and added. Dear Mr. Moore, the truth had cost him once already. Tomorrow would show if he could afford to pay that price again. But for the first time since this started, the choice felt clear. The clock struck midnight as he hit send. The hospital board room buzzed with quiet conversation. Michael sat outside with Sarah, both still in their pajamas. Through the glass walls, he watched his mom stand before the board, hands clasped, head high. Is Mama going to lose her job? Sarah whispered. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. Ms. Chun, court in 1 hour. You ready? The hospital boardroom door opened. His mom emerged, face unreadable. 2-week suspension, no pay, she said quietly. Final warning. Michael's heart sank. Mom, I know. She hugged him tight. You did the right thing. Now, let's go make it count. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. Word had leaked about the DA's investigation. Camera flashes popped as the Moore's legal team arrived, looking less confident than before. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Michael spotted Tommy and his dad in the back row. Brandon sat with his father, but the usual smirk was gone, replaced by something closer to fear. Judge Thompson entered, and the room quieted. Unusual circumstances warrant unusual measures, he began. This court has received new evidence that necessitates immediate review. Mr. Thompson, please take the stand. Michael's legs felt like lead as he walked to the witness box. The oath felt heavy on his tongue. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Ms. Chen approached first. Michael, tell us about your diary. He pulled out the worn notebook. 2 years ago, after Brandon and his friends bullied me about my dad leaving, I started writing everything down. Every incident, every victim, every time someone bought silence. Why? Michael looked at his mom, at Sarah. Because someone had to remember. Someone had to keep count. Read us the entry from October 12th last year. Michael opened to the marked page. Brandon cornered Marcus Williams in the locker room. Marcus's mom cleans houses for Brandon's neighbors. Brandon said if Marcus didn't give him test answers, he'd make sure his mom lost clients. Objection. Pierce stood. These are unsubstantiated allegations. Your Honor, Ms. Chun held up a file. We have Marcus Williams and his mother here today, ready to testify. Pierce paled. Behind him, Richard Moore whispered urgently to his phone. Continue, Michael, Judge Thompson said. For the next hour, Michael read entry after entry. Names, dates, details that match school records, hospital reports, transfer requests. A pattern of abuse and silence bought with money and threats. December 3rd, Michael read. Brandon pushed James, chin down the stairs. 3 witnesses. Next day, James's family received a college fund offer. They moved to California a week later. January 15th, he continued. Brandon stole Lisa Martinez's art project, destroyed it before the competition. Her mom works at his dad's company. Lisa dropped out of art class the next day. With each entry, more people in the gallery nodded, remembering. Some cried quietly. And the day of the trophy case incident, Ms. Chen prompted. Michael described everything. Brandon cornering Tommy. The threats. The first punch thrown. Why did you step in? He looked at his sister. Because staying quiet hurts worse than speaking up. Pierce's cross-examination was aggressive. Quite a story, Mr. Thompson. But isn't it true you were offered a very generous settlement? Yes, to cover your sister's medical bills. Your mother's job security. Your entire future. Yes, but you turn it down. Why? Don't you care about your family? Michael met Brandon's eyes. I care about everyone's family. That's why I'm here. Pretty words. But you expect us to believe a 14-year-old kept perfect records for 2 years? Never missed a detail? Never made a mistake? No. Michael opened his phone. That's why I took pictures. Recorded conversations. Asked victims to write statements. Pierce froze. Behind him, Richard Moore stood abruptly. Your Honor, I request a recess. Denied. Judge Thompson's voice cracked like a whip. Mr. Thompson, continue. Michael played recordings. Brandon bragging about payoffs. More threatening parents. The janitor being pressured to change his statement. And this, Michael said, pulling up one last file. From the day Moore offered me the deal, the courtroom speakers carried Moore's voice clearly. Take the money. Sign the papers. Or watch your sister struggle to breathe. Brandon slumped in his chair. His father's face turned purple. Your Honor, Pierce tried again. These recordings match perfectly with my courtroom surveillance. Judge Thompson smiled. Interesting coincidence. The gallery erupted in whispers. Michael saw Tommy crying in his father's arms, other families huddled together. Years of fear finally breaking. One last question, Ms. Chen said. Why come forward now? Michael looked at his family. His mom's tired smile. Sarah's brave face. Then at Brandon, alone in his fortress of lies. Because some things cost too much to keep quiet, and some prices are worth paying to do what's right. As he stepped down, The bailiff squeezed his shoulder. Through the courthouse windows, Michael saw more families arriving, clutching papers, ready to speak. The truth had found its voice. Now it was singing in chorus. Judge Thompson's gavel cracked once. In light of this testimony, this court orders an immediate. The door burst open. A woman in a federal agent's jacket entered, followed by a team. Richard Moore. She held up a badge. FBI. We have some questions about witness tampering across state lines. Moore stood straightening his tie. Pierce, handle this. I have a meeting, sir. The agent's voice was steel. That wasn't a request. As they led Moore out, Brandon sat alone, his expensive clothes suddenly looking like a child's costume. Michael walked back to his family. His mom hugged him tight. 2 weeks suspension, she whispered. Worth every minute. Sarah tugged his sleeve. Did you win? Michael watched more agents enter. More families stepped forward. Years of silence finally breaking. No, Mija, he said. We all did. The truth had cost them. But as Michael watched justice finally arrive, he knew some prices bought things worth more than money could measure. His phone buzzed one last time. Tommy, thank you for being braver than the rest of us. Outside, the morning sun hit the courthouse steps. Michael stood with his family, watching the future arrive one testimony at a time. The price of truth was high, but silence would have cost them their souls. The emergency school board meeting felt like a funeral. Principal Edwards sat with his head bowed as parents filled every seat in the conference room, their voices a steady rumble of anger and hurt. 6 years, Mrs. Martinez said, standing. My daughter Lisa quit art because of Brandon Moore. She had a scholarship offer. My son Marcus stopped eating lunch at school, Mrs. Williams added. Started hiding his lunch money in his socks. Michael sat between his mom and Ms. Chun, watching face after face come forward. Stories spilling out like water through broken dam. The board calls Michael Thompson, the chairwoman announced. The room hushed as Michael approached the podium. Through the window, he could see news vans in the parking lot. Richard Moore's arrest was already trending online. Show them, Miss Chun whispered. Michael connected his phone to the projector. The screen filled with his diary entries, photos, recordings. 2 years of documented abuse organized by date and victim. This isn't just about Brandon, he said. It's about a system that let money silence truth. Principal Edwards flinched as Michael played a recording of him, dismissing a complaint about Brandon. Parents' word against Moore? Do you know how much they donate? More evidence followed. Altered records. Missing complaints. Staff pressured to look away. My father's lawyers will fight this. Brandon's voice rang from another recording. They always do. Money talks, right? The board members exchanged glances. The chairwoman leaned forward. Mr. Edwards, do you have anything to say? The principal stood slowly. I was trying to protect the school's funding by sacrificing its students. Edwards had no answer. The boardroom door opened. FBI agent Carter entered, files under her arm. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but we have Richard Moore's phone records. Calls to board members, school officials, parents. Evidence of systematic intimidation going back years. She laid out documents, offshore accounts, secret payments, a web of corruption with the Moores at its center. There's more, Agent Carter continued. Mr. Moore didn't just target this school. We found similar patterns in 3 districts. The chairwoman's face hardened. I've heard enough. Principal Edwards, please surrender your keys and credentials. Security will escort you out. As Edwards left, shoulders slumped, Michael saw Tommy Peterson slip into the room with his father. We'd like to speak, Mr. Peterson said. The janitor's testimony was quiet but devastating. Years of watching, forced to stay silent to keep his job. The day he'd finally copied the security footage, knowing it might cost him everything. I was a coward, he finished. Until Michael showed me courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just one person standing up when everyone else stays seated. The chairwoman called a brief recess. In the hallway, Michael found Brandon sitting alone on a bench, staring at his phone. They froze our accounts, Brandon said without looking up. Dad's probably going to jail. Michael should have felt triumph. Instead, he felt something closer to pity. You could have had real friends, he said, instead of people who feared you. Brandon finally looked up, eyes red. What am I supposed to do now? Start over. Tell the truth. Be better. Back in the boardroom, the chairwoman read out their decisions. Principal Edwards terminated. Full review of all disciplinary records. New anti-bullying protocols with real enforcement. Counseling services expanded. And, she paused, a new scholarship fund for victims of bullying, paid for by seized assets from the Moore corruption case. Michael's mom squeezed his hand as Agent Carter approached their table. The DA wants to talk about your testimony for the criminal case, she said. And the FBI is looking into civil rights violations. This could get bigger. How much bigger? Moore had connections to school boards across 3 states. Shell companies, fake charities, kickback schemes. Your evidence broke open something huge. Sarah tugged Michael's sleeve. Does this mean Mama keeps her job? Agent Carter smiled. Actually, about that. The hospital board received some interesting calls this morning. Seems Mr. Moore had influence there too. They're very eager to make things right. Michael's mom gasped as she read the letter Agent Carter handed her. Full reinstatement? With back pay and a promotion? Amazing what happens when wealthy criminals start cooperating to reduce their sentences. The boardroom slowly emptied. Families lingered, sharing stories, exchanging numbers. Years of isolation ending as truth built new bridges. Tommy approached Michael, hand extended. I'm sorry I was too scared to stand with you. You're standing now, Michael said, shaking his hand. That's what matters. Outside, the autumn sun painted the school grounds gold. Students gathered in clusters, watching news vans come and go. Brandon's old friends huddled together, lost without their leader. Michael's phone buzzed with messages from strangers. You inspired my kid to speak up. Thank you for being brave. My daughter can finally sleep at night. Ms. Chin appeared with more news. Judge Thompson signed the orders. All charges against you dropped. And there's more. He wants to start a student advocacy program. Says you gave him an idea. Will you help? Michael asked. Already drafting proposals? She smiled. Sometimes justice needs young voices to wake it up. Sarah's breathing machine hummed softly as they drove home. The hospital pharmacy had called. Her new medication was approved, fully covered. Miguel? She asked sleepily. Are the bad people going away? He thought of Brandon alone on that bench. Of all the broken pieces truth was bringing to light. Some of them, he said. The rest might learn to be better. His phone lit up one last time. Judge Thompson, you started something important, son. Ready to help finish it? Michael looked at his family, at the city scrolling past. At all the schools where other kids might be writing their own diaries, waiting for someone to listen. Yes, he typed back. Where do we start? 3 months later, Boston Public High felt like a different school. New security cameras covered every hallway. Real ones this time, monitored by an independent company. The old trophy case had been replaced with a bulletin board covered in anti-bullying resources and student support information. Michael walked through the main entrance, no longer keeping his head down. Students nodded as he passed, some offering fist bumps or quiet thanks. Hey, Michael, Tommy called from his locker. Did you see the news? Michael pulled out his phone. The headline read, Richard Moore pleads guilty in multi-state school corruption case. 10 years, Tommy said, plus they're seizing everything. Dad says the restitution fund is in the millions. The morning announcements crackled over the speakers. Reminder, Student Advocacy Council meets during lunch. All welcome, and congratulations to our new principal, Dr. Martinez, on her first month. Michael headed to his first class, pausing as he passed the guidance office. Through the window, he saw Brandon sitting with the counselor. The former bully looked different now. Cheaper clothes, no designer backpack. His father's arrest had stripped away the facade of wealth, leaving just a teenager trying to find his way. Their eyes met briefly. Brandon nodded once, not quite an apology, but something close to acknowledgement. Mr. Thompson? Michael turned. Agent Carter stood in the hallway with Ms. Chun and Judge Thompson. Got a minute? The judge asked. In the conference room, they laid out papers across the table. The advocacy program is expanding, Ms. Chun explained. 3 more schools want to implement it. We need student leaders to help train their peers. Your diary system, Agent Carter added, we're developing it into an app. Secure reporting, evidence collection, Victim Support Resources. Would you consult on the design? Michael picked up a brochure. Voices Against Violence, Student Leadership Program. It's a lot to ask, Judge Thompson said. You've already done more than most adults would dare. When do we start? They smiled. Ms. Chen pulled out a calendar. First training session is Saturday. We already cleared it with your mom. Speaking of his mom, Michael spotted her through the window, walking down the hall in her new hospital administrator's uniform. She was dropping Sarah off for her first day back after a long absence. Sarah's asthma had improved dramatically with a new medication. She bounced alongside their mom, no inhaler in sight, chattering about joining the drama club. There's something else, Agent Carter said. The FBI's Victim Compensation Fund. Your family's claim was approved. She slid over a document. Michael's eyes widened at the number. That's enough for both kids' college, Judge Thompson said, plus a housing allowance. No strings, no silence required. Just justice working the way it should. The bell rang. In the hall, students hurried to class. Michael watched Tommy helping a freshman find his classroom. Saw former victims walking tall. Noticed Brandon picking up someone's dropped books. The app needs a name, Ms. Chen said. Any ideas? Michael thought about his diary, about all the silent voices finally speaking. Truth is stamina, he said. Because it does. Later, during lunch, Michael sat with the Student Advocacy Council. Kids from all grades crowded around tables, sharing stories, offering support, building something new from the ashes of fear. His phone buzzed with updates. Mom, hospital board approved the new youth wellness program. Mrs. Peterson, Tommy got accepted to art school. Scholarship covered everything. Ms. Chun, 3 more families came forward. You free to talk to them? Judge Thompson, state adopting new anti-bullying legislation. They're calling it the Thompson Protocol. Sarah poked her head into the cafeteria. Miguel, drama club said yes. I got the lead in the play. He watched his sister dash off, healthy and happy. Watched Tommy sketching in his notebook, talent no longer hidden. Saw Brandon sitting alone, but looking lighter, like someone setting down a heavy burden. The afternoon sun streamed through windows recently cleaned by Mr. Peterson, now head of maintenance with a proper staff and budget. In the front office, Dr. Martinez met with parents, her door literally and figuratively open. Michael opened his phone's notes app. He still documented everything, but now with hope rather than despair. Today's entry was simple. Truth costs. Silence costs more. Choose wisely. The final bell rang. Students flooded the halls, no longer divided by fear and money. Michael packed his bag, filled with college brochures and advocacy program materials. Ready to go? Tommy asked. Council meeting at the courthouse. Michael looked around the school one last time, at all the small changes adding up to something huge. At the light replacing shadows, voice replacing silence. Yeah, he said. I'm ready. Outside, autumn was turning to winter. But inside Boston Public High, something new was blooming. Something built on truth, nurtured by courage, growing stronger every day. Michael's phone lit up one last time. A message from an unknown number. You were right. Being better feels good. He smiled. Type back. One day at a time. The truth had cost them all something. But as Michael walked out with his head high, surrounded by people no longer afraid to stand tall, he knew they'd bought something priceless. A future where silence no longer won, where money couldn't bury truth, where one person's courage could light the way for others to follow. And that was worth every price they'd paid.